Okay. So, what I want to do is really just turn to the co-chairs for a quick welcome, and then we'll talk through what we're going to cover and off.
Welcome, everybody. Just to same thing as my comment this morning. Thank you for agreeing to doing these meetings back to back. We thought there was enough, if not overlap, tangentially important information for both groups. So we tried this, and thanks for hanging in there.
Just join Dan in that welcome. Good to see you all again.
Great. So we have a number of things we're going to go through in terms of commission business. I think from last time, a few other things, and just doing some process that we need to do. Then we're going to hear a presentation about derelict gear initiative and marine debris, which I think we're going to be interested to hear about. That's going to be great. Again, Bob is going to do that piece. We do have a chance for public comment, and then next steps. So this meeting is a little lighter, but when you see our work plan for September, that meeting is a little heavy. So we'll talk about that when we get there. Dan, did you have any? I think I noticed in my notes here, there's a quick update on recent fishery public body.
Yeah, just to keep the various groups informed of what the other groups are doing. On the Marine Fisheries Advisory Commission front, we have scheduled a meeting for Tuesday, July 1st. For one very important reason, this is to approve the final emergency regulations to repeal those gauge increases for the lobster fishery, which if you're following the news in the last 6 months, we went forward with some lobster conservation measures as a group of states, especially in the Gulf of Maine. And Maine pulled out at the 11th hour, and it's pretty awkward for us since we had already enacted the regs, and as did New Hampshire. So we're going back to ASMFC over the next 2 meetings to sort of figure out next steps relative to fisheries management for lobsters and stock assessments coming up. But specific to the meeting on July 1st, it's critical that we get a final action from our commission to approve those emergency regs, or the gauge increase is going to go up on about 650 area 1 lobster, 3,000 to 4,000 I'm sorry, 650 commercial area 1 lobster, and about 3,000 to 4,000 rec lobster, and a bunch of dealers, and there's no gauges available on the market. So it's kind of a critical situation. So I'm hopeful that I'll have votes. And expecting I will. And then on the public hearing front, we're working with with our staff and some of the surf clam vessels. And we introduced vessel trackers in the surf clam fishery, and we're hopeful that we can go to public hearing this fall with a proposal to require vessel trackers on the vessels to not only understand where they fish, but also to keep those boats out of known eelgrass areas, which is an important part of the department's biodiversity goals to protect habitat. No good surf clam captain ever wants to tow in eelgrass, but the way the fishery works, sometimes they have hired captains that might make a mistake or two. And then on legislation, this wasn't part of the agenda, but I do feel I need to kind of mention this. There is some legislation that's out there right now that might be of interest to the panel. And one of them is a prohibition on the taking of horseshoe crabs for bait. And that's getting a lot of public, a lot of buzz in social media among the advocates. Another one is an act creating a commercial fisheries offshore wind mitigation fund that's filed by Bruce Tarr. Another one is an act providing for a wind farm study by Marcus Vaughn. Another one is an act to provide economic security for fishing industry participants. And that's Pat Kearney and Joseph Sweezy. What's interesting about that is a lot of the legislators are now looking at the potential for members of the lobster fishery to take advantage of unemployment, like during closed seasons. But to do that, you actually have to pay into the unemployment program. That's my understanding. In order to do that, you kind of have to be an employee of companies, so as Beth could probably explain, it's about incorporating, creating an LLC, to then be able to pay in, so you can pull money out, and so that takes a little bit of, effort, time, legal work, and so, that's being, that's what that bill is about, and also a program where monies could be made available for lobstermen who are displaced by whale closures. And that's Jennifer Imini, Kathleen Lenatra. And so those are bills that we could get you more information if anybody's interested in those specifics. If you guys want, or you could individually, weigh in on them. And then finally, there's a request in the Senate budget for a earmark to DMF for $60,000 to support this group, in terms of staff and of course the great services from CBI. So we're hopeful that that can pass as well.
So, there's a bill to ban horseshoe, the bait fishery for horseshoe crab.
Yeah.
It's kind of interesting because, the fluke fishery is basically the horseshoe crab fishery with a bycatch of fluke. I think that would have a huge impact on people's ability to make money in that fishery.
Yeah, the advocates for that are the same ones who I think have routinely campaigned for more and more horseshoe crab conservation because of the linkage to shorebirds, and so.
So, what about the medical fishery then? Would
Yeah,
that still
that-
exist?
Well, again, it's a bill that's filed on behalf of a constituent, but the way it's written, it says, it's the bait quota. It's that which is caught specifically for bait, not the biomedical quota that we have, so that the other one will be less harmless. However, if you happen to see anything about this on social media, it's even less accurate in the depiction of it, because it says that it's a bill that's going to ban the use of horseshoe crabs as bait. And that's very different, because even in states like New Jersey that have no bait fishery, they don't ban use of horseshoe crabs as bait, so other states export their crabs there, so. Yeah, I just bring it to your attention because it's out
Yeah.
there.
We want you all to know.
It's in committee. I think it went to the natural resources.
Beth,
There's another bill, H 4040. It's regarding Holtec at Pilgrim Nuclear Power Plant, the decommissioning. And it's serious. Does the state ever weigh in on legislation,
Beth,
the environmental impact?
what is the proposal?
They want to discharge or evaporate 100 million gallons, a million gallons of safe radioactive water into Cape Cod Bay.
So the answer about weighing in on it is, yes, the governor's office, it definitely takes positions on that, and they'll ask a line agency like mine, or EFG or DEP, most likely, for their views of it, and so we don't. An agency like mine typically doesn't weigh in,
Right.
but we might be communicating that.
I can fill you a little bit more on the status of that, so just so everyone's
Bob,
aware.
just so Katie can hear, do you mind just standing, getting a little
Yes,
closer?
closer, sorry. DEP is the one who would authorize a discharge permit for that, and they denied it. This is back last year. My understanding is that Holtec is trying to appeal that right now. I think so this bill is just an additional attempt to try to be allowed to discharge it. So we have our agency in comments to DEP and in the discharge process have commented against allowing that, but I don't know the current status, other than it's under appeal.
So when I bring these to your attention, I'd be happy to supply you the rest of the information, but it'd be really up to you as an individual organization to decide whether we do. Yeah, okay.
So the offshore wind mitigation fund legislation, is that? Give me more information on that. I'll Google it while we're sitting
Yeah.
here.
I can give you what I've got. I got the bill here.
Okay,
I just want to let you know.
do you have like a just a
Yeah,
quick
what's-
highlight of what it, mitigation fund with. Like,
Supplementing the developers fund.
Well, Bruce
Yeah.
Starr is the sponsor, so I'm gonna walk it over, just get to see. I just want you to know it's there. I haven't been consulted.
So Jackie, check with us, what's the analysis?
Yeah, Bill 668.
I'll report back at the end of the meeting.
Send it 668.
Yeah, we expect to report back in an hour, so get to work. Again, the DMAP is constrained in what it can do, but it certainly brings to the attention we can discuss, and obviously raise strong concerns about the way fishery for horseshoe. That's the point about go ground, and then, you know, I think Jack, it's like, what is this thing that clearly we will talk about now, it's something to a piece of the same perspective. Yeah. Okay. All right, good. So we'll start plowing through a number of things. So there were two kind of subgroups that I could call focus groups, I think, focus groups that we had between last meeting and this meeting, and they've done some work. So I'm going to talk about the offshore wind group. There's a few things in there about how we can proceed, so we need some direction about what next. And then Story's going to talk about the port piece after I, and then we'll learn about it. Okay. Thank you. Okay, so I just want to go through what the subgroup or the focus group talked about, and then there's things we could do, but we probably need to pick one or two going forward. So again, I think just a recommendation for the meeting this morning is I think what the group talked about is the Fisheries group really works on the weeds on specific projects and kind of in the details of offshore wind. This group is really, if you got bigger policy issues or broader cross-cutting issues you do all might want to raise, like for instance, a fisheries compensation fund would I easily fall in the purview of this group, for instance. The question of AIS on the turbines and arrays, that falls probably the fisheries would really kind of thing. Generally, I think the thought is to try to hold these meetings, maybe not the same day, to see, or we can have whether that works or not, doesn't work. But get just close enough that if there's something that comes out of fisheries working through, you all can pick it up and decide what you want to do with it relatively. And then again, it may be that you all identify things you want the fisheries working group to potentially do, and vice versa. I imagine the fisheries working group could say, hey, this is a policy issue. Why don't the commission take it up? So that was our chance. Okay. Okay, so there's 4 potential actions that we identified in the conversation. So I think when we go through these, I want some conversation about where you think we should go. So one is just to learn from the projects that are constructed or about to be constructed. That's going to be Southport, Rev, Sunrise, in your essentially the southern area, then Empire, your bite, Seaval, which is maybe less affecting most of you. But there is the Virginia is the Seaval, which is the Virginia offshore project off of Virginia, which is also under construction. So what was it, do we develop a method to track actual effects of offshore wind development of fishing in and around existing rates and use evidence to actually learn from it? And then should other projects move forward, can we give some better or different advice about layouts, construction practices, whatever? Like bouldering is a good example from fisheries work group where we're kind of learning in real time. And now there's focus and effort and collaboration, but it kind of get over like, what's this thing? And then everybody had to kind of catch up. So that's one thing that we could do. There are monitoring plans post-construction that people are doing. Certainly something the fisheries work group could follow, but something that this group could potentially carry.
I had no comment on that. We had a presentation earlier this morning about what the developers are doing to monitor. Conversation with Chris after his presentation, that potentially is proprietary. Because they're paying for it. There is no guarantee that it's public. The stuff from Rosa would be public because it's so type of organization it is. And anything the state does, I think would be FOIA, eligible. So that's a concern. I mean, we heard at one of the fisheries working groups years ago. When it was back when there was a permitting process that one of the developers said that they weren't going to share any information that didn't advance their permitting process. Now that's a concern. So we have to be able to make sure that any information that's found is public. I'm not sure how we could ensure that.
There, briefly on this, so the Inspector General's report that was issued around the turn of administration in January, February, said BOEM has got to work better on figuring out how to these data streams or trying to all these different projects. One is how do you make them more, you know, consistent and standardized and available. And so there was some pressure to do that. I know that Rosa has got a subgroup working on some of the fisheries kind of data streams and how to start bringing some standardization, consistency, and ideally some transparency. But there's a long ways to go. Erica, you said it absolutely true. And Jackie, I don't know, you mentioned to some of the council for those too. I don't think.
Well, yesterday we had a presentation, or one of the days this week, well, big blur. On the lack of standards for monitoring from project to project. And, you know, should there be, you know, what questions are we looking to have answered? Like, what are we looking to monitor in these sites? And how can there maybe be consistency among the different developers and what research they're doing, what questions they're looking to have answered. So NOAA is currently working on a draft, I think, that'll be available for comment, maybe by the public and by the council on those questions of having there be consistency and standards and monitoring and what research questions are being asked. So we just got that presentation this week.
Just on a broader scale, Melanie Griffin, Mass DOT. On a broader scale, there's also that executive order.
Yeah.
To gold standard of science that very specifically speaks to transparency and availability. So that may be another opportunity to comment.
Yeah.
I thought this morning we heard that, was it CEC or Rosa, one of them had funded just that, right? Monitoring the use of the arrays now going forward. Did I not?
Yeah, well, it's kind of like that. One of the, this is Kevin Sturchbury at SMAS. One of the projects that Rosa funded, Chris Rulihan's, the lead on that. And that's looking at, so we had a meeting of for the Mass wind farm areas. And I started to talk about extension. Part of the problem is that when these lease areas were designated, they didn't set up control areas in kind of an appropriate fashion.
Yeah.
So that you can have a control area in it. So you have to, so it's very difficult to do a before after control impact, which is the best, in my opinion, the best experimental design for monitoring the impact of it, without a control that mimics the impact area. And so that project in particular is looking at all the different environmental projects and seeing if we can combine some of the control areas to make sure that every area at least is covered or represented. So when we developed the monitoring plan with Vineyard Wind, you know, originally we were hoping that would be picked up and approved, so it's similar, and in some cases it is a kind of similar sampling procedures, ventless trap survey, groundfish survey, benthic observation, usually, you know, that's it's the drop camera, sometimes it's that head cam, but that basic data structure is the same. So the photo of the sea floor. So for the New England areas, they are kind of doing that as we go south. It's falling off.
Have you thought, in terms of data transparency, which is Eric's very fair concern, what kind of conversations have you had with folks about that? Like, it feels like developers don't want to release it for fear of competitive disadvantage, they want to keep this confidential. Sometimes researchers don't want to give it up until they. Like, so.
You're not gonna
They don't take it. So it's
But,
not a bit of a sticky wicket, so I'm just curious what you.
Yeah, well, for us, we, so. As the University of Massachusetts, we have to have a data sharing agreement. That the data that we collect can be used by students in their theses and can be published. And so there's, you know, it's an agreement. But some of the developers didn't want to do that, and so they've gone with private environmental groups. But if they're working with us, it's an agreement that's all published. So that's why you like go on Vineyard Wind and see all the reports, all the data is published there, and it's also the same reports are with the council. So and just yeah, so that, I mean, that has been a big push. I know Rose is talking about that with their data forth, and I think also, you know, there's the Northeast data portal, so, I'll push for that too, I'm a real advocate for it, but.
Yeah, it's just been great. I think Eric brings up a really important point, and I think as a recommendation, that should be, the data should be publicly available. And to Kevin's point about the control areas, I think that was always a concern I had, is you can never study cumulative impacts, because what was a control area for one lease site then becomes a lease area for another, and so it's no longer untouched from any type of either boulder or any kind of construction practices. And I know something that was really frustrating when I worked with the Commercial Fisheries Research Foundation was there was some acoustic great work by Jeff Kneebone at the aquarium, but he was contracted by every single wind developer to do acoustic work for their wind farm. So he had all this data and he wanted to be able to kind of share it, but each wind developer didn't want that data shared. And so it's like this network of acoustic, which I know one of the projects is looking at that, so maybe they've kind of overcome that barrier, but or gotten enough developers to agree to share. But it's concerning to me when that information isn't being used, because then everyone's doing their own thing, but not working together to get the answers to some of these questions.
One thing we can do is very, there's various strands of stuff going on, so it's gonna be perfect, but we can do the two-pager app where they pull together what we know is happening or not happening, data transparency, but fisheries data produced by developers. And then that's at least start to look at kind of what's happening. It's not, but it remains.
With all due respect, I think this conversation is off the mark, because I read that bullet and I'm thinking, I want to use VMS lobster tracker data to know who's successfully fishing in the array, how have those fishing practices changed? Do we need sharing agreements within the array? And when I read that, I don't think of what effect did it have on it's a concern, but I don't see that as captured in that bullet. So I'm just curious, like, a lot of this is government data, so who among us, or even the federal government, is going to, we really, as these projects get developed, look at who is inside, who can successfully fish, because that's why they spread them out by a mile.
Well, that's what you heard this morning, Dan, about Mass CEC funding the project that the Port Authority is gonna do, to do the test trawls through the wind energy areas that we have out there. To compare that to the simulations that have been done to set the 1 by 1 mile grid, because we don't know if the 1 by 1 mile works, particularly for
Right.
multiple vessels or in
Right.
bad weather or whatever, right? So the point of this, the work that we're gonna do with Kevin's team is to actually physically get out there and see what it looks like.
Will you use VMS data and lobster vessel tracker data?
Well, we haven't even, because we're still in the contracting phase, so we haven't actually done a scoping session on exactly how we're gonna do it.
Yeah.
So I think I'd like to do all of those things, right? We just have to figure that out after the scoping session.
You know, I just think, when you get that site specific, I think the whole thing becomes ineffectual. And I've said this a lot, that the potential for harm is going to exist outside of the footprint of any wind farm. And to zero in on the exact geographical footprint of the wind farm, I think is I think it's just a false trail. And I don't even see how it's even worth it.
You mean because of displacement of effort or because
Because of displacement of effort, because of a broader negative impact to an ecosystem. You know, whether you're influencing spawning, whether you're influencing fish migration, you know, blah, 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 it goes on and on. And
Well,
it's always been, and then it becomes a basis of mitigation, when they come and say, oh, well, you gotta prove that you were actually right there. Well, how do you know you're not going to impact or have already impacted the Massachusetts state squid fishery? Because I think they already have.
You wanna change that bullet?
I don't wanna do anything.
That bullet to me.
I just did what I'm gonna
No,
do.
but I'm trying to make the bullet real. I wanna be able to deliver on the bullet, and to me, it should be about BMS and tracker data to see if, at first order way, are people excluded from the array? I mean, isn't that a fundamental question?
Well, this does say around the existing arrays, so it is outside, it's not necessarily just.
But I think.
What I was referring to when I first brought this up was the HVADC to the conversion towers, the AC to DC conversion towers. And the science from that monitoring. That monitoring was first told to me as being seasonal, 4 times a year, which would miss a lot. If it's proprietary and they find out that they're killing a lot of larval, species, it's gonna affect everything. That's what we can learn from it. If that information is not proprietary and is shared, we can learn from it for future studies. This type of cooling is not allowed inshore. Brayton Point had built cooling towers for this very reason.
We know, well, I'll come back to that, because there's questions about that, whether if it's an open loop system versus a closed loop system, right? And what they install, which is.
Well, this is an open loop system.
Yeah, it's all open loop. They have said that that it's not feasible to do closed loop systems offshore. So right now, all of the offshore substations are open loop.
So let me
Can I just interject
Yeah.
that the open loop systems are permitted by the federal government, US EPA. And so the work that needs to be done is in the permit and is required, and because it's required by federal permit, it's all available to everyone.
Yeah.
So the contractor is out right now doing work, which some folks know about in the field, and those data have been shared internally, but not out in the world yet, until they publish it, right? So that'll be it, but
Who's doing that work? I mean,
We're doing some of it.
you're doing some of it.
All right, so
I mean,
it's got a permit, so it's not gonna be, has to be.
Okay, but I mean, the BOEM requires the monitoring. But they don't require the contract.
BOEM doesn't require that, though,
that's me.
monitor, it's EPA.
EPA,
Yes, federal
okay.
government.
So
As long as it's public, then it's
It will
fine,
be,
but
it's just not
my
public
concern
now,
is that
it has
if
to
it's
be
proprietary
public.
and it's not shared.
So to Dan's point, I think if this, I'm gonna go through the other three and then we'll see where we go. So I think if people have an interest in this topic, I think the subgroup or the breakout, we need to then explore who's doing what or not doing what on this issue and come back to this group with very concrete ideas for recommendations. So I think we want to know, is Noah doing anything and who knows? The staff, the work you guys are finding will start to do that.
Yeah, the only thing I will add, and then I promise to stop, but I can't help myself. And the other issue here is that all of the impact analysis done by WHOI presumes that you can fish in 95% of the offshore wind energy areas. That needs to be tested, because I think that number is preposterous, right? So this exercise that we're gonna try to go through, we'll really see what areas in there can actually be fished. So that's the other piece of the analysis that we'll do.
No, I think that's an important point is in fact, BOEM's guidance on compensation calculation is essentially based on 5 year plus. Great, yeah. Okay, I'm going to the other ones and we'll come back to which of these, maybe which like 2 of these 4 you want to group first. So the other piece is really look at and again, one of the challenges, we don't know if offshore wind, how much more it's gonna happen in the next 4 years or later. We also don't know whether the process could change, all those caveats. We could review the planning and permitting process for offshore wind and identify the key state leverage points, right? Because that's where you have more influence here is at the state. Such as CZM review or PPAs could involve fishermen more effectively and directly. So that one, you can have influence and put at the right time. And then secondly, used to generate, planning stories and research, resilience, whatever. So this would be more focused on really understanding leverage points for the planning process, such that the fishing communities feel like they have a better role in the water. And that would take some work and investigation.
Wouldn't the RFA take this whole thing right off the table, because all the monies would go into the regional fund administrator? Or is this prior to that?
It's a good question. I mean, theoretically, I guess to some things, yes, I think that's true. I think though, if you all wanted to look at you know, how many, like, the Gulf of Maine is relatively nascent, right? So, and then their cops are years down the road. So if you all want to look at the process and where the state potentially can use its authority to intervene earlier or get more engagement or whatever it is, you can look at that process and see. And there may be some stuff in the process where it's so far down the road, not much else you can do, so. Sure. Okay, next one. Oh, sorry, please.
Am I allowed to speak over here?
If you add.
We have a vote, I think, don't we?
No,
Let me ask the commission.
yeah.
Lisa, would you like to bring forth useful? Okay.
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
The two phrases in this bullet seem very different to me. And I would recommend pulling them out as two separate action items. I think engaging more with the fishing community in CZM review and PBAs and other state reviews is really important. Period, and that can affect change to a project. It can also result in money for various things. I do not think that those two are necessarily linked. There is a reason to engage with the fishing community besides generating money for research.
I think you're right. I think about this. I think you're right. They're muddled. There's actually two separate ones here. So one is about the process in general, how to be more influential. The second one is directly about dollars, potentially tied to RFA, but also the regional fund administrator.
Or betterments,
With that.
or betterment.
And the resiliency funds that have been negotiated, I don't know how many would be left. Those are done really through the consistency review, and those are really distinct from the direct payments of the regional fund administrator. So there is
Right.
potentially. I think, so let's note that this is really two things, not one. Okay, so this is specific to the improve economic and compensatory mitigation analysis. This is ideas when you calculate the money in, there's methodologies, as Gordon has pointed out, that Hui and others have developed that are used to get at the number, and then ultimately that number is actually negotiated, and BOEM trues it up for other states if those states want to involve, so on and so forth. So to actually look at those methodologies to date and find ways to improve. And it would certainly affect the Gulf of Maine. I don't know how many southern England areas have not done their pit story analysis. So how many do you think? Lisa?
I mean, there's BP, and then Vineyard Offshore,
Okay,
which is two.
so two.
Oh, no, and Starboard, the other Orsted project.
Okay, so three roughly, it still could be, so it'd be the Gulf of Maine ones and these. So it's really taking a hard look at that, see if we could do better. So that's a very specific country, but it's a little bit tied to number two, second. Okay, purple. All right, and this, I think this is just doable, it's easy. The regional fund administrator with the design oversight committee, which is Beth, you were on it. We've got actually Brad is on it. So there's a number of folks in here on it, but that's going through its process. And I think when it gets a little further along, it can bring to you and if there's working group, where it's at, what its program design ideas are, you also get feedback. I think that's it. That's it. We can definitely do. That's easy piece. Okay, so and then lastly, I think the group just noted, and also Dan addressed this, is the focus with the, so that's the fact that CFC is legislatively mandated, but not funded. So the focus group recommends working this year to get what we can get done, but potentially then for the next budget year, we really have identified a set of activities and dollars associated to actually legislature to actually fund. As we get forward. So I think this is just noted by that group to, I think, come forward. For sure. All right, so let's go back. So going to one. So again, this year, we can send back to our focus group to kind of detail this further, because we need to understand what's happening, what if NOAA's doing anything. So is that of interest to try to understand more about who's tracking what's happened fishing in these arrays? Is that of interest?
I think it would be good to understand it and watching Vineyard Wind One come online and their notices to mariners with their circles around the towers that are being worked on. I had conversations with Krista, like how far in advance do you know which tower you're gonna be working on? Because if lobstermen are in there fishing, they need time to move their gear. There's gear over by Tower 1 and Tower 21. That's a distance apart, so I mean, I think it would be good to understand. Cause the maintenance and ongoing as these things come online, the maintenance on each structure is gonna be ongoing.
That's right.
I was just wondering if there, I mean, I know right now we don't have any flow dates, but whether if we're making recommendations, if it should be broken into fixed versus floating, depending on what you're saying, it's approving layouts and just thinking that. Whether this group would want to be making recommendations, although we don't know yet with floating, or if we're just specifically in terms of this action, just focusing on things that I didn't know.
Maybe add Bassford Island in this area, so you differentiate between the.
Yeah, so I.
Yeah.
For now, it's fixed.
Yeah, yeah.
It's real.
Yeah, I'm. In looking at it and reading this, I'm wondering if the key component of this, and what it separates it a little bit differently from what we've talked about with other ones is the last phrase, that if the goal of it is to improve layout and construction practices, that maybe that's the focus of how you, because that data is a little bit different than just economic, collection for economic impact. If you're really trying to collect the information that you want to then take to the developers or regulators and say, look, this wasn't considered this time, this has an effect, and you've got to redesign these things so that you can incorporate those. I mean, I guess the one mile grid, which was a compromise, and really the Coast Guard determined that it wasn't what the fishing industries suggested.
And so for instance, to your point, like imagine we looked and we realized that, geez, if they were 1.1, it would make everyone's life a lot better, right? We learned that would be perfect.
Well, it's going the other way though, right? So a lot of them are being laid out at 0.6 in the New York budget, right? So that's really what we wanna test, whether that is even feasible.
I guess the other question is sometimes if you can squish them together more, but then have more area around them, is that better than spreading them out where you're probably? Pretty much.
Yep.
So I know we're under the gun in southern New England and we're kind of, developing our research as we're in all sorts of different phases of development, but just going back to what Aubrey said, I mean, the work we've done so far in the Gulf of Maine has kind of been on presence, looking at data for who fishes in the area, but not how are they fishing in that area? What's the seasonality? What's the what are trawl tows in those areas? What are they fishing for? How are they fishing? So that kind of baseline data in general may be very helpful to before we start getting down the road of the, layouts and construction plans and stuff. So I don't know if we want to kick that can too far down the road. I know we're in a little bit of a quiet time right now, but just, kind of keeping that in the back of our mind that, that is to be developed. We don't know when, but will be some time. And if there's anything data collection we can do in the Gulf of Maine prior to understanding fishing activity and fishing practices now, before we get too far down the road, I think that would be helpful.
That's first to off to it. The crazy idea would be if New Hampshire, Mass, and Maine together with their fishermen try to kind of lay this out in more detail, because there's a lot of collection of fish to go. So.
How are you gonna consider the fact that right now you probably have a small percentage of boats ground fishing due to constraints on sector contributions, and so what you might be seeing now might not be what it is in the future, and how do you factor that in?
I'm gonna turn to Jack.
I mean, there's so much. I wouldn't even know where to, 521 right now is no longer Georges Bank, it's now the Western Gulf of Maine, so. We're gonna have to really grapple with how we're gonna handle what it is today, what it was 5-10 years ago, and what it may be in 5 years from now. So I think we're gonna have to be flexible and fluid and recognize that regulations is greatly gonna change, and sector allocations and cod delineation changes are gonna drastically change how and why people fish, and we're gonna have to be mindful of that. I don't know how they're gonna, we can't even get to that.
But it makes me think of what you were saying, Eric, too. I think, was it New York Bight with the 2000? Well, I forget the years that we were just listening to the presentation, but that wasn't representative of the scallop fleet because that area wasn't open.
Oh, those 3 years.
The 3 years. So to me, simply to Ed's point about like brown fishing, now, the footprint now versus when it was later, I think those are the kind of discussions we're gonna have with developers when talking about a time frame, because they may not know the weeds like we do of fisheries of when certain areas have been opened or closed, or that fishermen are not able to fish there, so the fishing footprint is much less. And so I think those are the nuances that it's important when engaging with the fishing industry, to understand if certain areas have been closed for right whales or scallop rotational management, but that's should be part of like some of these recommendations we're talking.
Totally.
And I think you're maybe now, and I go to Beth, and then I'm
Just in my head going.
but I do think if the offshore wind developers, like the floating offshore wind developers, are gonna move probably slower just because of the technology. And it's early in the leases and they're staying for their terms right now. This seems like a perfect time for communication and understanding to grow, because now rather than have to constantly react to stuff coming on top of them. Potentially we can get this information and share knowledge going sooner. So I think it's fair for the subgroup to think about how to perform that.
So just as a side note, though, this is why fishing industry groups and like work bodies like this, the Commercial Fisheries Commission, is so critically important, is because the folks that are not involved in the fishing industry don't know the nuances of the years they choose, the data they're selecting, what data they're not using it. This is where we are supposed to have our voice, is in that educating people and making sure that any standards or parameters or years, or that they understand what they're, what that means, or how they may be completely off the mark on something.
Beth and Kevin is going to get a summary right here.
So again, I would recommend making a Gulf of Maine action 1 and a Southern New England action 1. Same verbiage, however you want it for the future. And, you know, bring in Garfo and put all the data out there and see what it looks like. The Northeast Regional Ocean Portal goes back a long time, so I think it will be a good starting point. But I think for Southern New England, we really need to see how fishermen can actually fish.
Are reacting.
And are reacting.
All right, that's a good, that's very good suggestions. I think that's what we're gonna do.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that point about the mid-Atlantic area off New York, why they picked those years, maybe we should ask for a presentation on how that was decided or done, because that data is all publicly available, that you've got at least 20 years of surveys. We have it. I mean, Fishery Service has it, that you have scallop industry, you have the exact abundance of where those scallops are there, and you have the VMS data. It's on the Northeast portal. You know, so you can easily take a look and see how much stock, how much exploitable stock, and how much fishing effort has been down there. So how did they make that decision? I know they didn't come and talk to me.
So what,
Maybe they consulted that information, that's why they chose those years.
Right.
Because they knew there was no.
But if this is going to impact those kind of decisions, then maybe we need to understand how they're making those decisions.
So I think this topic has energy, it has 2 parts to it, as Beth just said, so I think we're gonna send this back to the focus group to develop some very specific recommendations for both Maine and so. Potentially bite. Okay, let's go to the next one here. So I think here, as Lisa pointed out, it's really 2 parts. So do you want to look at this, should the subgroup look at the permitting and planning process and figure out where there are key leverage points for the state and for fisheries? So that's something that would be useful.
Yeah.
I think you continually are hearing fishermen ask, like, where in the timeline can we weigh in, like, if there's a way to make that clear to people.
And then my thought is in for 3 is, okay, this is a pretty big one. You want to, and you also could kick this back to somebody else if you want, like the Fisheries Work Group is, you know, there is, again, there'll be Gulf of Maine analysis, and Lisa said there's 3 left in Southern New England where you could affect potentially the compensation methodology. So this would require probably this would require some money, because you'd have to hire a consultant to review all the existing methodologies, critique them and the like. Now, California has hired someone to actually do a review of these and is developing their own kind of formula for calculating dollars. I don't know what's look that different than the existing ones, but there is a report on that when it's public, for somebody to come present. We can pull off on this if you don't want to go down this pathway. What do you think about this? This is kind of a pretty analytical exercise, but we'll have the chance to influence 6 future opportunities.
I mean, I like it, and if we could request the legislature fund, you know, put money into DMF, that we could put out a request for proposal. You know, that's, I think it's a good idea. We obviously don't. I don't think we have any staff that are capable of doing that.
It's you can have a pretty serious economic,
Yeah,
skill set to be able to really dive, and I think, the challenge. Okay, so, the challenge of the thing with WHOI, right, is that, it's a very prestigious organization. It did a very thorough methodology. Is it the right methodology? I don't, a lot of fishermen, think it is, I would attribute some flaws to it, and yet, in order to challenge it, can't be me, what do I know? It's gotta be like someone who's got. So it's just, that's one of the challenges, I think, kind of perception wise as well as practical. Okay, so is this may be an easy recommendation, it's more like this is what we need, and we don't necessarily do it ourselves, so.
And this one would be maybe more for next year after you would ask the legislature for.
well, legislatures can provide money mid-year, like in a sub-budget. I mean, once you develop the ask, you can just stand at the door and with your hand out until they give it to you. It's not necessarily an ending, right? I think there are other funding opportunities within a calendar year.
So just going back to Ed's point, reflect the actual financial impacts on fishing. This would be inside and outside of an actual wind farm area. We need to be thoughtful of that.
You look at shoreside multipliers.
Yeah, and also, displacing the fishing effort and, there's just a lot there that hopefully we can redefine, but.
Yeah, I was just gonna say along that, I think that sometimes they don't account for like when boats have had to move out of an area for a week or two during certain construction activities, and so that might be a way of including some of that, and that's normally not included.
One of the challenges actually in the methodology, we have to make assumptions for how long the construction period is, which turns out to have been probably inaccurate, so that's another example.
Yeah, this is a great action. I think that it's warranted and really necessary. I would suggest that the group spend some time trying to flesh it out more. Like have a subgroup or just a few people sit down and try and put pen to paper on what this group really means by that, because when funding comes in, there will need to be an RFP written or some sort of description of what is meant by this project. And just as an example, I mean, part of the project could be, let's take the WHOI analysis and check it. Right? Or it could be, let's just start full clean plate and do a whole analysis. So there are a couple of different ways to look at it, right? And to advance it, so I think.
And maybe the task here.
Worth the time.
Maybe the task here is to write, maybe not a full RFP, but like really a pre-scope an RFP. The thing could be funded and then it gets into the full RFP, the people are. And so the sub-focus group could like work on that to somebody thinks it's just, scope.
It just seems like there are a lot of different ideas here that are really good, but they should capture.
And this one here, we'll just coordinate with the RFA to you all figure out the timing of that, whether it's in a regular meeting or we can have a special meeting. We'll do that. So we will coordinate with everybody on that. Okay, so we've got a specific number of things for this focus group. So what I suggest is we've got good notes, talked about breaking out, floating and fixed. We've honed some of these things. And so what we'll do is we will, bring that to kind of the focus group, same folks, which I can't remember who will said, we'll get some calls going to kind of get that. That makes sense. Okay. All right, thank you. Katie, I know you've been very quiet. So Katie, anything you want to add before I go to the next one?
I'm all set for right now. Thank you. I am listening. All very good points being made.
There you go. Don't be afraid. Raise your hand when you find. We'll hopefully see it. Get you ready. Okay. Story. Over to you.
Yeah. All right, so the port profile focus group met a couple Mondays ago on June 16th. Ed, Gordon, Beth and Henri were all there. We had a good meeting. I'll take you through some of the things we talked about in the next slide, and then go over a timeline for the port profile project itself. And you'll remember that we're starting on kind of round 2 of the port profile project that was first done about 5 years ago. So what the focus group focused on was mainly the 2 surveys that we used to collect data from the harbor masters and the fishermen. And then also a little bit of conversation on the fisheries data that we use, that we have internal to DMF. So in terms of the fisheries data, some of the things that came out of the meeting, and this is not an exhaustive list, this is just some of the things I pulled out that were kind of the highlights. So there was a discussion about, in this next version, digging deeper into the permit information to get into active permits versus inactive permits and how those trends look by port. So kind of what are the trends doing? And now that we're doing this 5 years later, we actually use 2018 data in the first profile, and we intend to at least get to 2024 data in this profile. So anyway, we're building the time series relative to this port profile project. So we'll look at that. There was a suggestion to consider separating out wild harvest from aquaculture data, which we can look at. And then getting into the surveys, the Harbor Master Survey, we focused in a lot on commercial versus recreational dockage and moorings, and also mooring waiting lists. And so to try to pull out some more information there, what is the definition of commercial in your harbor? Some it might be more about fishing, some it might be up to the harbor master, some it might include other commercial activities. So just to put a finer point on that, which I think makes a lot of sense. Also to ask the harbor masters about recent grants they've received from infrastructure, and to get into some of the cost path that I know you were talking about previously. Also maybe putting a dollar amount on some of those projects that you may have done recently to help with that. I mean, we talked a little bit about how every port is different, every project is different, you know, a pier rehab here is not the same cost as a pier rehab there, and so forth. So we'll look at that. Also, the question about some of the coastal resiliency issues. We were very shortly after the CZM presentation on coastal resiliency, so that was fresh on the mind. Then when you get into the fisher survey, the harvesters, we asked the question in the previous profile, what infrastructure projects have taken place recently that benefit you? There also could be projects that have taken place in your port that didn't benefit you, that maybe hindered your activities for whatever reason. So potentially asking a question on that. We didn't have, especially on the North Shore, as much of a seasonal lobster trap storage issue when we first did the port profile project. Now that seasonal closure is expanding north, so maybe asking a question there, and that could be a question both for the fishermen and the harbor masters, other side. So thinking about that. And then a question to understand commute times for harvesters. So that was a good thought, and that would obviously be an easy one. You know, the other thing is, you talk about all these good ideas, you still want these surveys to be manageable, right? For everybody to respond to. So we forecasted to respond its last time, hey, we think this is going to take you about 15 minutes. That's probably, especially for fishermen, what we want to keep it to. We don't want people to get turned off. So this was all good feedback. And so I think we'll go to the next slide and I can talk about how this fits in. And taking questions, but.
Question about U times, is that fishermen being driven away from the coast in terms of housing?
Yeah. Yeah. Or maybe where they're able to get a slip or in. Yeah. We could ask, you know, what impacts that maybe. So this is the timeline, draft timeline for sure of the profile project itself. So here we are in June, we met with this focus group. We've started the fishery statistics work at DMF, so that's great. We're getting going on that. So beginning this summer, We're gonna partner again with Urban Harbors Institute from UMass Boston, who we worked with on the first profile. So again, that's gonna save some time. They have a lot of experience both administering surveys, but also, good relationships with the harbor masters in each community, and that's kind of what, drove us to them 5 or 6 years ago to begin work on this. So we're gonna start working with them this summer. We're gonna take the feedback we've gotten on the surveys, and finalize the survey. And then I think bring it back to this focus group for another read through. Kind of an explanation on how we ended up where we are. It's sort of a proofread and make sure we're on the right track. So anytime you see an asterisk in here, I think is where definitely this focus group can engage. Then in the fall and into early winter, we'll distribute surveys. And, you know, when we did this last time, it was COVID. It was early COVID, and so some of the outreach that we had planned, like at industry events and whatnot, it just wasn't able to happen. So we want to do more of that this time around. And, you know, Beth had brought up the MLA show in January coming up, having it available there. And maybe even paper format, right? Just have it there, or just promote it. So, we can do that. And then, once that's done, work with Urban Harbors to analyze the results and write the report. And hopefully release the report next spring and then do some outreach on it. So, that's where we're at. It's still really early. Obviously, we haven't even got going yet with Urban Harbors, but this was a great start.
I just want to say thank you, Story. The last port report is really helpful for us as industry representatives when we go talk to legislature, you know, people in other states. It's like, here, read the report. It's a great tool. And I had mentioned on our call, you know, infrastructure is as good as it can be when the fishermen know what they need. And like I said, in Marshfield, and I can attest to it, that they built the wall 2 feet too high or something with the tides, it didn't work. And I just got a call last week from one of our members up in Swampscott, and some town resident wanted to redo the whole fishing pier without any input from the industry for like $20 million. He brought it to the town. And he called me and he said, thank you for the information, because I sent the lobster tables and I gave them all the verbiage to say this, that, and the other thing, and they got it, they're getting it fixed for 600,000. So 600,000 versus 20 million, the fishermen will be happy. That's what we care about. So this report's gonna be even better than the first.
I hope so.
It will, it will.
I have a question on.
To be determined.
Definition of commercial.
Stay tuned.
You've got commercial harvesters, you've got commercial construction, whether wind power or whatever. You've got the for hire charters. You've also got, you know, the Liberty Boat Club, which, you know, just is a rental agency. It's all commercial.
Right.
How do you categorize each response?
Well, we asked, and we targeted, okay, let's start with who we targeted last time, commercial permit holders and for hire permit holders is who we sent it out to. And we asked to
Fishing.
fishing, yeah, commercial fishing, to identify which category you can develop. Now, obviously, somebody could get a hold of the survey and, you know, make that up, I suppose, but that's who we targeted. And, you know, in terms of the harbor masters, it was specific to commercial fishing.
Okay.
We did ask about some trailer vessels, but to the harbor master.
So, but it's still focusing on fishing, because
Yes,
it's not other
absolutely.
commercial ventures, okay.
Absolutely, but we do want to get at that question of what do the towns consider commercial? Right, because it's, you know, I
Yeah.
think from our perspective, it says commercial fishing, it's implied commercial fishing, because of what this is about. But what is your town's definition of commercial? We heard some examples in our call about, you know, a project happens and then there's different commercial activities that are better accommodated by that.
That's right.
So we do want to get at that.
Okay.
But I think the original one was focusing on commercial fishing
Yeah.
impact.
Absolutely.
And I think that, again, this one should focus on commercial fishing impact. Instead of, I mean, you know, otherwise, and we could have another one that would then, and it kind of goes back to, on the call, I was saying that, you know, it would be, I think it's important to separate out aquaculture versus commercial fishing. So if we're gonna do it on commercial fishing, we do it on commercial fishing with a pretty standard definition of that as a. And you can do it, you know, we can do another one encompassing everything, you know, construction, boat landings, marinas, you know, the whole bag of tricks that happens down the waterfront. But I think for us, we need to stay specific to fishing.
So we were focusing on infrastructure, Eric, like, you know, offloading facilities. All commercial fishing, ice, bait store, you know, all different
Okay,
things like that. So,
didn't get that clear when you were talking about the Harbor Master Survey.
good question.
Other questions for Story? No, I think it's moving forward, which is great. Okay, all right, so last time you all asked, I think, to see if you could get on the Mass Food Policy Council of greater seat for fisheries and seafood. So I will give you a quick update. So I believe some of you, we sent in a letter, right? Correct, I believe on that that went forward. And so I reached out to the council yesterday. So they said the council has full support for adding a fisheries seat. And that that's a very important part of the Mass kind of food system. And then there is one other note there. It turns out that the request to include a fisheries seat on the Mass Food Council is actually filed in 3 pieces of legislation. I can send this out from Cabral, Kane, and Comerford. And also in the Governor's Economic Development Bond Bill that just was released, it also has that in there as well. So it's in a lot of places. So my goodness, I totally have this assumed. So it's in there. So I think thank you for also the letter. It sounds like it's a process. It wasn't up. It was that they sent it yesterday. All right, Abby.
All right, we just wanted to check in on the resilient post draft plan virtual meeting that we had. So we had a kind of interim commission meeting on this a few weeks ago. This came out of a request from our first meeting where people wanted to learn more about it. So we did that. Pat and I just realized that we never sent out the summary of the Q&A. So apologies about that, but we'll get that out ASAP. So it's ready. We just haven't sent it. But for those who weren't able to attend, any key takeaways that you want to share with the group or any like implications or next steps for this commission to take on that? We heard the update from Allison that the final will come out, so I'm sure you'll hear about that. Okay, I'm glad we were able to do that during the comment period, so thanks for helping put that on. Okay, next up, we wanted to move to the charter, which Bradley, I think you're going to go over. It's in your staggered. Oh, sorry, I jumped ahead. We're gonna do survey response. I'll finish it.
That's the one. There we go.
So this is just a summary of the responses that we received from the survey that went out initially to you all, and then we modified it to be sent out to your organizations and constituents. So we can go to the next slide. Sorry. So we had 35 total respondents. For primary fisheries, 35 stated that one of their primary fisheries was lobster. And then a couple more had just a mix. So we have groundfish, sea scallop, highly migratory, mixed trawl, and shellfish. But lobster is obviously the predominant response. And for home ports, the greatest sections were from South Shore and North Shore, and then 7 from Cape and Islands, and a handful from Boston and the South Coast. And then just to give a quick background on the analysis of the survey responses, it pretty much, it gave each question on a scale from 0 to 10, from least interested to most interested. How interested are you in the CFC pursuing these issues or questions? So this looked at people who scored 9 or 10 as a promoter. Detractors were 0 to 6, so it kind of leaves out those middle ground 7 to 8 to really pull out things that are of really strong interest or things that are really low interest. It finds the percent, a difference in percent those. So higher score, it means much higher interest.
And so Bradley, just, this was the same questions that we asked you at the first meeting, and we asked you to kind of share out with your constituents, right? They're the same.
Yeah. Just to break down the most popular ideas, these were higher than 30 for the NPS score. These included addressing economic effects of fisheries management decisions, improving state offshore wind policy procedures to give the fishing industry a more meaningful seat, expanding markets for local sustainable seafood, developing best practices for mitigating impacts of offshore wind on commercial fisheries, and local seafood market. And then some of these mid ideas that were still popular, but just a little bit less so, identifying lessons learned from offshore wind, streamlining permitting processes for harbor and port development, working waterfront infrastructure and port investment, developing recommendations to improve communication when arrays go awry, improving science of fisheries management and more collaborative research, and ensuring state plans, activities, policies, support and enhance commercial fisheries. So things like resilient coasts plan and collaborating on that. And then some of the least favorite ideas, these were developing harvesting guidelines or best practices within wind energy areas, shoreside processing needs and improvement, and developing framework for the DMF managed offshore wind resiliency funds. And very, very unpopular ideas included developing recommendations on offshore wind transmission, addressing aging of the fleet, so both in vessels and with the permit holders themselves, adaptive management, especially considering climate change and innovations in gear, sustainable fishing gear technology.
And one might note, the last two are heavily related to attempts they did the recent action on lobster, or the last few years on lobster. So the last two, and give the lobster strong respondents. There might be a lot of reading into those two topics, I suspect.
You think?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, thank you.
And then just kind of summarizing each of those final takeaways, highest interest for things like addressing mitigating economic impacts, especially with offshore wind, commercial fishery representation, and expanding local seafood markets. We also had the port infrastructure, communication around offshore wind planning, improved science of fisheries management, and supporting commercial fishing through state policies. And again, those least interested groups, kind of beyond lessons learned in mitigation with offshore wind, shoreside processing, aging fleet, adaptive management, all those. And then just another caveat, that most of the respondents, one of their primary fisheries was lobster industry. We have a final slide just on, they had an option to write in comments as well. So these aren't really a feel for the whole group, but just things that were of note, asking for more support through unemployment or new fisheries during seasonal closures, fewer permit transfer restrictions, changing the price of lobsters for wholesalers, ineffective management practices, identification, and just streamlining some regulatory processes.
And some of those might be more related to Dan's other job. So it's.
Feels like an MLA weekend.
Everybody filled out the survey, so.
Welcome, sending it out.
I'm gonna be Uncle Dave whipping everybody up. Fill out the survey.
No, we like people who respond. It's good.
Yeah.
So remember, if you don't respond, your issues don't get in.
Right.
I have that adage, if you don't vote, you can't complain.
Sure.
So I think, I mean, if anyone wants to share a comment now, that's welcome, but we are gonna talk about the overall work plan we're almost there. And so we wanna keep in mind everything that we have talked about today so far, including these survey responses. So I think we can hold unless there are any like burning comments that you share. thanks for getting the word out about that. Okay, so now we're gonna move to the charter, which we've sent out, I think a few times now, and there's a copy in your packet. There, and Bradley, are you gonna, I think you wanna know about like edits and then we do an adoption vote, is that right?
Yes, yeah, so if there's minor edits, we can still adopt. If there's more substantial suggestions, then we'll consider those in that. Bring it.
I just have a comment on the 1, 2, 3, 4th line down. Ensure the needs and interests of the commercial fishing and seafood industries are properly considered. Conservation economic. Economic interests or just interests covers all that economics is. Economic development isn't fishermen going out fishing, that, I don't call that economic development. So is there a sustainability or is that part of our homes?
Yeah, maybe economic interests. I think it may have, yeah, some of this is word for word.
The question is, did it come out of the legislation?
So it came right out of the.
We need to double check. I
Yeah,
think we're
but
not.
somewhere in there could be economic interest, because economic development, that's for shoreside businesses.
Nice, okay.
Maybe
I was thinking of like economic
Economic development.
economic needs and development have something. Yeah, I see what you're saying.
Maybe.
Wouldn't that be like fisheries training them?
Right?
The economic development was with the fishing.
Well, that's shoreside, but on the water, like fishermen aren't economically developing when they go out fishing. I guess, I don't know. A clearer definition.
It's one of those catch-all terms.
Yeah, I
that-
guess.
Okay.
Ed, did you have a?
No.
Oh. Okay, so we'll just check on that if it needs to be the same as legislation, but I
Yeah.
think that your point is definitely heard, making sure it's a little broader. Okay, any other comments? Okay, so then how do we do our,
I'm looking at the legislature now to see if it has a written specifically.
could we adopt it and then with the caveat that we need to check?
Sure, yeah, is that?
Yeah,
Okay,
there's
so
no objections.
any objections? Okay,
Right.
consider adopted, but we'll check on that. And then Pat, you're gonna do the work plan, which is another handout and I'll pull it up.
Okay, so this is the work plan for kind of April through the end of the year, so we're already partway through, so ignore everything till July. So in July is to, again, to take, you could saw like a story had a good timeline for the board's study, and then we need to kind of, we need to go back to the offshore wind group and develop some more details, as we talked about, but we'll go over the timeline too. So the thought is that those folks will do work concurrent with our regular commission meetings and try to get something so that by fall or later fall, we've got recommendations to go final report for the year and actually with hopefully dollars attached and following season, which may happen before the next budget year is getting set. Okay, September kind of gets packed up with stuff. So we've got our working groups doing stuff, which may or may not be ready to report back. Then we really want to hear about chapter 91. Allison and DP were tasked to kind of look at DPA. So they've got a work on kind of what's happening with DPAs, which doesn't potentially affect fishing. That will come out sometime this summer. People asked about enforcement of chapter 91, they get these permits, because they don't actually enforce them, it's pointed out, I'm sure they do, so stuff they said they would do, they don't do. So we can have a presentation, but it's gonna be pretty thick, so that's a whole bunch of stuff there. Then, MDR is more than willing to come to talk about their programs and how they're tied to seafood and seafood marketing and seafood as part of the food system in Massachusetts. And food grants and those things, and maybe over that time, watch have a seat. Council. So again, that's another topic. Again, through Gordon's help, we can definitely have the economic development folks in Massachusetts really come and talk about what it means for economic development vis-a-vis fishing and what they are and aren't doing, and could potentially be doing around that. And Gordon has hopefully connected back to that agency, ports and fishing. So he's been helpful to kind of make those connections. They just couldn't come today. And again, that's another pitch discussion. And then there is a specific working waterfront initiative that Maine does on its ports. I will say that it's very focused on what's its original main port, which is small, right, compared to Bedford for that kind of stuff. But there are a lot of smaller ports in Massachusetts too, so we can certainly have them come talk about what they're doing in that regard. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Oh,
I just had a question about that,
yeah, go for it.
but I don't want to interrupt.
No, no.
Uh,
Fire away.
So I had a note to bring it up, but I noticed, a few weeks ago in Maine that, Representative Morgan Riley created a working waterfront advisory council, and the legislation would establish a working waterfront information and technical assistance fund. That would spread awareness about Maine's working waterfronts, and it would have funds to use promotional tools such as brochures, advertisements, campaigns, all about working waterfronts. And I just thought and they created this advisory council. I don't know if that's something that we could get more information about and then see how we could do it for Massachusetts. I don't know if that's different than the working waterfront. I assume it's different, but.
We can look at it all, so that's great, so we might reach even back to Aaron, who was here earlier today, and figure out, so it's there, I mean, I might, if you can just send it a little more detail.
Sure.
So, so if we were to do all those things, it would either be a full day meeting, or we might need to break it up, so that's that, and then our thought is October, November, we continue to work to hone our recommendations for the year. We really come back in December with really a draft report with all our stuff in it. Through the focus groups, and anything else we develop with the presentations, and then we actually try to deliver something right by the end of the year to the legislature. So a lot of stuff to cover in September, ongoing work of our subgroups, and then hopefully some recommendations at the end of the year that we move forward. So that's kind of the thought for the look of this year. So comments, thoughts, things to take out, good sort of things to add, what we do.
We can certainly move the MOBD one to December, right? That's,
Does you think it has any specific action items, or is it much more learn and engage?
no, right, as I teed it up for them, they're the audience, right? And it's us sort of briefing them on, stuff that I just think they don't know, like everything that is around this table about what the industry does. I think it's just not familiar with a lot of the senior leadership that I've developed. So that's how I was expecting or envisioning the conversation to go, but that can happen in December as easily as it can happen in September.
And that might take some work to get all of you prepared to present to them, so we really do a pretty good job.
Which I'm happy to help.
I think, I'm really interested in the working waterfront issues, and at a minimum, it should wind up in our annual report to the legislature saying, hey, this is something that really should be prioritized by the legislature. I confess, I don't know enough about the issues. I know Maine has a very strong program. I know they have annual conferences around the country on this issue. But it would be useful if we all think that Massachusetts should have a higher priority for working waterfronts, that we should in some capacity bring that to the legislature. I mean, not everything has to be done by this commission. I mean, we're interested in the issue because of the commercial fishing industry, but working waterfronts are not just commercial fishing. And I think other states like Maine, are ahead of us on that, and there is some learning that we can do from them, but I would love to see our final report deliver some message to the legislature that should be.
And I think Phil, the main research institute, Maine Sea Grant, I don't know the state of Sea Grant is these days, but there's a lot of folks that are working on that, so we can figure out how to bring that, so you can gel them from that, some recommendations for sure. So something like that's important, we maybe move that kind of.
And Lisa just came back.
Yes.
You've done a lot of work on working waterfronts, and that's what we're talking about, is having a discussion item going forward, and maybe getting this into our annual report as a call to the legislature, like, this state needs to take that more seriously.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I think, like, EOED just got a new secretary yesterday. Yes. So. That's the topic. Also, I think there's tie-ins with the state focus on climate tech and then ocean tech is what EUV has been focusing a bit more on. And then needs of supporting the new ocean tech space that Massachusetts wants to be a leader in, because obviously port infrastructure is for many things. It can support many different industries. So I think there's a really clear tie-in there, and something that makes a lot of sense to support.
Well, and I would just say, as you previewed, we're likely by the September meeting to have some of the findings of the designated port area assessment report. So that will be some good opportunity for discussion following that. And would note that the Mass Ready Act, the environmental bond bill from the legislative administration was released earlier this week. And among the items in it is call for a port sustainability commission to look particularly at the needs of industries and how ports moving forward in the future. So I think there'll be a good opportunity to talk more about that as well.
I
And
think of it-
ADC funding.
Yes, and some authorization.
Yeah.
Which is disclaimer different than appropriation, but an important first step around supporting maintenance and resilience in our designated water.
And I think on that, maybe commercial fisheries, right?
Yes, there is, the current, the Mass Ready Act legislation draft calls for a seat for fisheries, yes. On
But
that.
only the designated port area.
It's a sustainability of Massachusetts ports as a whole. It has a focus on the 10 designated port areas, but it's not necessarily exclusive to them.
Okay, so I think maybe if you unless anyone's in a rush to get to IMDAR, maybe we don't try to do that in September. We've got, chapter 91, what those folks are producing, working waterfront and our kind of our breakout groups. That's probably more than enough. So we do economic development to December. And then we pull up on IMDAR for a bit. We tackle kind of a number of things on chapter 91, days, ports, et cetera, working waterfront. And then that would probably be small down. And then, yeah, the other ones is needs and innovations in seafood processing, which did not end up high on the survey, was medium level in your guys' survey. I don't know whether we want to do anything on that or we pull off on that, but how could be tied probably to what we said about like, climate tech, marine tech, ocean tech, et cetera. And then the other thing we had on there was the collaborative research and alternative studies to inform science management. That's also, councils are in a bit of flux because they sort out all this with the different staffing levels and those things too, so that's very helpful. Council for them. So. What do you think about those other two topics? I would just kind of. The thing is, we've got a lot to do. with
Yeah.
this, but
Those last two feel like a fisheries work movement.
But unless it's clamoring for, we'll hopefully make a second stand. We're not necessarily gonna lose anything. You guys are commission till whenever, so just for now, we're gonna focus on what we can get done with priorities.
You said whenever, not forever, right?
I didn't say whenever, because I was very careful to not say forever. But funny how governments often don't put sunset clauses in.
This
so-
one has it,
Oh, does it?
5 years.
Oh, there we.
This one does?
Is it 8 years?
Yeah.
That's so.
Yeah. Yeah.
What's the sunset for this next year?
It's at 5 days.
I think it's 8 from the legislature.
Yeah.
It's 8 from the legislation.
But we fiddled in little years.
Okay, I thought it was 5 from the
So
legislation.
hey, we may decide
You got it
in the
hard.
5th year that this needs to go forward, so I'm sure we can get Bruce Todd.
Let's get successful this year, that will
There you
work
go.
out, here's 2 through.
Okay, so that's all of the like commission business, so thank you, we'll send out an updated work plan and start putting together the next round of focus groups to move some of these things forward, and then the September meeting. Okay, so we're gonna move now to Bob, who's gonna talk to us about the Fair Year Initiative and marine debris work. Let's see. Gonna take me 1 second to fill the blank. Yes.
All right.
Go Abby.
Now we are, okay, over to you, Bob.
All right, thank you very much, Abby. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Bob Glenn, Deputy Director at Mass DMF. And today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about work that we've been doing for the last several years to kind of crack the issue of managing derelict fishing gear in Massachusetts. Next slide, please. So derelict fishing gear in more modern times, in more modern vernacular, is also called ADLFG, so abandoned, lost, or otherwise discarded fishing gear. But to make it simple, I'm just going to refer to it as derelict fishing gear throughout this. It's primarily in Massachusetts is composed of fixed fishing gear, which includes traps, pots, gill nets, ropes and buoys for the most part. And that's obviously related to our biggest fixed gear fisheries in Massachusetts is lobster fishing and then to a lesser degree, walled pot fishing. Derelict fishing gear causes problems both in the ocean and on land. And in recent years, the scale has increased pretty substantially for a number of reasons. One is that our fixed gear fisheries, namely lobster, has increased in scale fairly dramatically since its early days. And also the materials used to construct fishing gear have changed pretty dramatically. At the heart of the issue, though, is that historical state statutes in Massachusetts have largely prevented us from being able to manage fishing gear. So it gives very explicit protections to fishing gear, and it doesn't in the state statutes does not differentiate between fishing gear or fishing gear debris, which is a really important distinction. One has value, the other does not. Next slide, please. So in 2022, Director McKernan formed the Massachusetts Derelict Gear Task Force. And I chaired this group, and it was basically a cross-section of stakeholders from state fisheries managers like myself, to our law enforcement members, our legal counsel from our department, but also multiple industry groups including Mass Lobstermen's Association, Cape Cod Commercial Fishermen's Alliance or Association. Sorry if I got the name wrong, Aubrey. The Hook. That's what I was gonna. But anyways, and this group met, had several meetings over a 2-year period and really did a deep dive into essentially trying to define the scale and scope of the issues and then come up with a white paper to outline those issues and give suggested legislative solutions. And then we serve that up to the Mass Legislature through the Massachusetts Coastal Caucus and really get a lot of support from them. And I'll get into that later. Next slide. So as I said, why is it such an issue? We've had lobster fisheries for, going back to the 1860s in Massachusetts. But again, what's changed is the scale of that fishery and also that in modern times, gear is more durable and persistent in environment because of changes in materials. Next slide. So this is a pretty cool slide. What I really want you to pay attention to in this is the solid line. So this goes back to 1888. To my knowledge, this is the longest time series of fisheries effort data in the United States. So it's pretty cool that the Massachusetts Fish and Game Commission started collecting this back in the 1880s. But this is the solid line is a number of traps fished in the Massachusetts lobster fishery going back to 1888. And you can see it back then, it was less than 50,000 traps. And over time, it advanced into around 100,000. It stayed around 100,000 post World War II, almost up to the 1970s. And after the mid-70s, it really took off and it went up to at its peak in excess of 400,000 traps. Initially, when the Massachusetts legislature took on protecting fishing gear, they did so in 1943. And that's because gear that would wash up on the beach was being reclaimed for coffee tables, for firewood, for whatever number of purposes. And that fishing gear had value to the owners. And so this legislature stepped in and said, it's protected. The only folks who can haul fishing gear, regardless of where it is either the owner or law enforcement. Period. The landowner, nobody could touch it. Next slide. And so now, the scale of our fishery in 2019 was, we're at around roughly 250,000 lobster traps, another 12,000 whelk pots, 4,000 fish pots, and then add in another 18,000 or so recreational lobster pots. You see, compared to the 1940s, we have a lot of gear in the water. And based on work that I conducted back in 2010 and 2011, we gave surveys to the fishing industry to try to get a sense of how much annually do fishers lose. And it's regionally dependent, depending on style of fishing and gear convention, whether it's singles or trawls and et cetera. But by and large, what we found was fairly universal reporting among fishers that they lose between 7 to 10% of their gear annually. And then also from collecting derelict fishing gear, what we found from the trap tags, which is a great little timestamp of when that gear was lost. We found that in some cases that gear could persist on the bottom in excess of a decade, 10 years. So that based on that being the most recent traps I found of derelict gear pulled off the bottom. So you can kind of see it's almost like compounding interest with derelict fishing gear, and that we have a lot of it. We lose 10% a year, but it doesn't go away. It kind of builds up over time. Then when we have big marine storms, it washes up on the beach and it causes a lot of issues. Next slide. And primarily one of the biggest changes is historically lobster gear was made out of, we see in this picture, out of wooden lace traps. The rope was made out of jute. And these all natural materials were biodegradable. So when lost in the environment, they degrade fairly rapidly. But around in the modern fishery, between, over the from late seventies to the early nineties, that gear transitioned entirely from natural materials almost over entirely to synthetic materials. So traps now are all made of wire, polyvinyl coated wire mesh, which persists, and all the ropes, instead of being natural fibers, are all made of propylene and polyethylene. Next slide. And so this causes a whole host of problems. Ghost fishing is one of them. From research that DMF has done, we've looked at the impacts of ghost gear left on the bottom, and we found that lobster traps, when lost, continue to catch and kill lobsters, crab, and finfish for in excess of 2 years at a catch rate that is almost similar to a baited trap. And we've done this from comparing baited gear to gear that's lost, and that's because it's a rebaiting effect. When the animal goes in and dies, it naturally acts as bait for another animal. This kind of perpetuates. And so, losing this gear has an impact on commercially important stocks, and to the bottom line of fishermen who are trying to catch those species. It also, we've seen that it causes ecosystem impacts like on habitats such as eelgrass or corals. And it generates microplastics in the environment, which is a ubiquitous problem as it breaks down. It also, buoyed gear, it poses an entanglement risk for things like Atlantic right whales and other large whales. Next slide. And then it also causes navigation hazards and gear conflicts. And so it can be really dangerous for mobile gear fishermen if they get into big balls of gear when they're hauled back, cause unsafe conditions on their vessel. And then in general, just to mariners who are transversing areas, getting ropes stuck in their props can cause issues. Next slide, please. And then finally, it's a real public nuisance and public safety issue in some cases. After these big wintertime northerly storms, these really large gear balls will wash up on shore. And as I said, they not only they were historically protected, but they also, as you can see from the scale, can cause really big issues. A real issue for the municipality having to deal with these large gear balls, and often get them off of remote sections of beach, or in many cases, even private landowners calling up and saying, I got 200 traps in my backyard. What do I do with them? Well, you can't touch it. It's always been an issue. So next slide. We'll skip this one in the interest of time. Go ahead. That's kind of the same point. And so essentially, we know that there's all kinds of, the issues associated with derelict gear are pretty well understood, and they're pretty broad. And there's a strong interest in addressing this issue. We've been dealing with it, DMF, year after year of calls like, can I pick up this gear? It's been abandoned there for weeks. No, you can't touch it, only with law enforcement, etc. Municipalities wanting authorizations to haul it off the beach. Conservation groups like Provincetown Center for Coastal Studies wanting to grapple up the gear. We've been authorizing that, but really not on firm ground, because again, the statute really only allowed the owner or law enforcement to touch it. And so with that white paper that we produced and gave to the legislature, luckily, very happy to report in December of this past year, the legislature did pass changes, which now gives Division of Marine Fisheries the authority to regulate derelict gear removal. Next slide, please. Okay, sorry, thanks. And so, but here's the primary statute there's two primary statutes that they changed, Mass General Law, Section 31, which historically, very specifically gave property ownership rights and will only allow the owner to. Now change it that it still allows that no person shall, without the consent of the owner, take, use, destroy, injure, or molest fishing gear. So there's still property rights afforded to intact fishing gear, which is important. But now it says notwithstanding the Division of Marine Fisheries with approval of the Marine Fisheries Advisory Commission and the Department of Fish and Game shall promulgate regulations that may authorize or permit the removal of fishing gear debris. So that term is now in the statute, and that distinction between fishing gear and fishing gear debris gives, and the authority to for us to regulate it, now gives us the opportunity to permit these activities, revolving around removing derelict fishing gear. And another note on here is that, fishing gear debris collected under our authority is not subject to general law, chapter 134. And these are the property laws. And so right now, historically, a fishing gear was subject to 134, which then means that gear belongs to the owner. Even if it's abandoned, it has to go through the whole state surplus rules and regulations to surplus it. And it's just a mess to deal with. That's gone now. Next slide. And then they completely wiped out section 32, which really outlined those rules and regulations of if the gear washes up, the riparian owner has to, hold on to it for 60 days before they can get rid of it, yada, yada. It was a mess. I'm not gonna go into all the legalese, but that's now gone. The other thing that we did, that we suggested and the legislature put into place was in our statutory, in section 1, we have all these definitions that define different aspects of marine fisheries. And in there, we made some specific changes to fishing gear and also added this new concept of fishing gear debris. And with some key terms, and we found in this case that looking at other examples around the country, that these terms are really important relative to defining these distinctions in a manner that allows us to be nimble and efficient, but also at the same time protects the actual, fishing gear property rights to the owner. And so here in this case, fishing gear is now defined as a trap, net, fish car, or other contrivance that is intact. And that key word is intact. Functions as intended to take, hold, or capture fish, and is maintained in the water during the open season. What's new in that definition is the words intact and open season. Why open season is because one of the biggest issues we found is that abandoned gear during the fixed gear closure in the wintertime was one of the biggest issues that we found. And trying to deal with hundreds of traps left behind and have to sort out who owned them was just too onerous, and we really not in the best interest of us trying to get the gear out in a quick and efficient manner. And so with that open season, any gear left behind in a closed season now can automatically be classified as fishing gear debris. And that really makes it much more efficient. And that gets to the term fishing gear debris, which is a new definition in our statutes that basically it's the same exact if trap, a net, a fish car, other contrivance that is not intact or left out full season. And so those distinctions are really key and will give us the flexibility to be able to get derelict fishing gear out of the water in time for them. Next slide. So now the next step is we now have the authority to regulate. Now we actually have to develop the regulations. And so I've been working with Jared Silver and our staff and Dan and kind of developing a regulatory framework for how this works. And one of the key things we need to do in the regulations is define what is intact. And the derelict fishing gear task force that I mentioned, we spent several meetings talking about this and even invited in some fisheries folks from other states like Florida and Washington State who deal with these issues as well, to kind of get feedback of how they deal with defining what's intact. And what we found is a more successful model is they tend to come up with basically criteria and they have, we'll say either 3 out of 4 or 2 out of 3 following criteria. So in our case, what we're proposing is, in this case, for commercial traffic constitute intact fishing gear, it shall have at least 3 of the following elements. So A is a buoy, so it has to be buoyed, set forth, and these numbers are references to our code of our CMRs, our regulations. So it has to be buoyed, it has to have a buoy line that is complies with both the marking and weak link modifications. It has to have a current year's trap tag. And it has to be, a trap that's configured with all the requirements, so. Which includes escape vents, ghost panels, and has 6 sides. This is how we would define intact, so. You come upon a piece of derelict or a piece of abandoned fishing gear. If it has 3 of those 4 requirements, we would say that is intact fishing gear. That is protected. We need to try to get that back to the owner. If it does not have 3 of those 4, it is then classified as fishing gear debris. And this definition allows us to differentiate cases where the owner is identifiable. The trap has all the elements that makes it functional and therefore has some value, so that it's just not a crushed trap with. And it also has a buoy line. It also allows us to identify what fishery it's coming from based on the buoy. And these are pretty key distinctions.
If it's crushed on one side, it's no longer intact.
Yeah, and it's correct, but it's, there's so many small scenarios that you really can't be that prescriptive in the definition, so there's still some subjective nature to it, so. In this case, yeah, if it's crushed on one side, we would not classify it as not as attacked, but. That's not specifically spelled out. We try to get the main components here that were already in our regulations that we could say it either complies, it has to comply with 3 out of the 4 of these. And
Please just go ahead.
Is DMS the only entity that's able to do this evaluation, or can you authorize like Provincetown or most of the states?
that's the next slide.
Oh,
Perfect
sorry.
segue. Thanks, Lisa, you nailed it.
Mark, you are.
Yeah, that's, and so what we're working on now is a framework that allows kind of 4 of the following activities, and what we're suggesting in this regulation package is to provide a blanket year-round authorization to any person or organization to remove and dispose of fishing gear debris found on the shoreline.
Like
So
post suite run by
yeah,
CZM.
a town, a town organization wants to do a gear cleanup. It's already in the regs, you can do it, you don't need authorization from us.
So can we get one? Cause we get calls all the time and I send delegates or fishermen down to the beach and I'm like, they bring it to the office and we get it back to them, or if it's now with debris, they can get rid of it wherever they do.
Correct.
There we go.
Yeah, so now that'll be.
Legally, we can,
blanket
we never
authorized.
do it illegally. I was just gonna say, has anyone ever been
Prosecuted for that?
Wait a second.
I don't think anyone has. I don't think there's been much court time.
Just frontier justice.
Two, the next,
Well, if I could, I think it's just important to note that, the DFG policy team worked with DMF pretty hard to build a coalition of people to get this, including a lot of the conservation organizations like the Inland Aquarium and others. I think it was not a priority in the legislature unless we really made it a priority. And I think it's important to note that this is one issue where everybody can come together. Yeah, we need to deal with this issue. I think it's something to celebrate as a combined commercial fishing, conservation, win. And it may just seem like, this wasn't really a big deal. We don't really need to do it, but I think you did. And I think it's a good statement that this is something that we can all gather around. It's an important thing to deal with. And it wouldn't happen, I'm telling you, if we don't get together on this. So I'm just giving a plug for our DFG policy team to work with you, Bob, on that.
I agree, Tom, and this, and I'd also give a similar plug to the fishing industry, because MLA was one of the proponents of pushing this, and the fishermen that we work with, we're all like, yeah, we have to find a way to make this more efficient, so thanks.
Macbeth, and then,
I thought it was kind of interesting when some legislatures were like, what? You can't do that, and I'm getting phone calls. Do you support? I'm like, we were part of it from the beginning, so we're glad that it's done, because it did take a year or 2 to get through the legislature, which I thought was kind of peculiar. but that's all right, nothing moves fast up in Boston, so, you know, we're glad it's done too, Tom.
Yeah.
Well, we started it before Tom.
Yeah, no, I know.
No, but I'm just saying, we got behind it.
Yeah, that's what I mean, this 2-year delay.
Yeah.
Came, you know, began before the team that's in there. now.
Exactly.
Aubrey, I think you might be answering it with number 4 with the mobile gear in state waters, but I know how frustrating it was in federal waters when things would get towed up and they can't bring it back to shore because they get in trouble and so it just gets dumped over. And I guess I don't know the extent of that in state waters, but I'm wondering in Rhode Island, like there was a lot of effort with the Rhode Island lobster industry to like map out hotspots for where gear is. And I'm just wondering if in state waters, if you have worked with lobstermen or others, if there are instances where there's like a pile of derelict traps that they know they historically couldn't bring in, but now maybe you can remove them.
Great question, Aubrey, and also I'll touch this now. Yeah, so we know that, you know, mobile gear fishermen routinely run into derelict lobster traps and the law technically did not allow for them to bring it in. And we know that what's fairly commonplace is probably 1 of 2 different outcomes. In most cases, those fishermen would tend to take that gear on board and then steam and drop it to a place where they know they're not gonna tow.
Right, exactly.
Because technically they could in possession bring it.
Right.
The exception to that would be, it's like, they know it belongs to Dan and his boat's too overhand and it was intact, they throw it on the deck and call Dan and say, hey, I got 2-year traps, here you go.
Right.
Those are kind of the 2 scenarios, even though they weren't, either one were technically, well, the first one was legal, the second was not. What we did is we reached out to several mobile gear fishers and fixed gear fishers, and MLA kindly hosted at their office, and we brought a few of those fishermen together from both sides, kind of discuss the issue. As you know, there's always been tension among mobile gear and fixed gear fishers and messing with traps and whatnot, but largely the feedback we got both from the fixed gear fishers and the mobile gear fishers were like, they weren't really worried about that. If they had an opportunity to be able to bring it in, they might. Now, in many cases, you know, we hear loud and clear, dealing with derelict fishing gear is a real pain in the butt. It's messy, it's sharp, it's dangerous. So a lot of folks don't, and then when you bring it back, what do we do with it? So we know that's a continued issue, one that we need to work on and to get better solutions, but now, at least with this, we are proposing in the new regulations to allow mobile gear vessels operating in state waters to bring it ashore and dispose of it or give it back to the owner if they choose. That is now a change.
Thank you.
One thing we are maintaining is that only DMF or MEP would be authorized to remove or dispose of fishing gear debris, buoyed fishing gear debris in the water. The reason for that is that gives us the opportunity during the closure, when we're doing the gear haul out, to inspect gear for compliance with gear marking and weak contrivances and trap tags. And it also, in general, unauthorized people start hauling buoyed gear, folks get pretty riled up and nervous, so you're gonna basically maintain only through the authorization through DMF or MEP.
Have you noticed a decline in lost gear, the closures, since you started retrieving it?
Since we started doing the gear,
Abandoned gear?
Abandoned
the
gear.
abandoned gear removal, and we started prosecuting violators, we've seen a substantial decline in the amount of gear left behind. So the first year, there was a ton. Second year, now the last few years, it's been much.
Well, it's not a good step for someone stealing it, even if they're pulling off.
Yeah, so in that bullet, there's one key word I realized I put bullet 2. That's very specific to buoyed fishing gear, and I forgot to put that, and 2 should be buoyed fishing gear, so that's different, and so we wanna maintain only that authority to do so, hauling buoyed gear to DMF. The reason, part of that is because we monitor compliance and enforce the rules that way, but second, folks get nervous when they start seeing people haul buoyed gear. Third, if it's buoyed, there's a good chance that it's not fishing gear debris, that it could very well be active gear or lost intact. The third one is dealing with cases where organizations like CCS who want to go out and grapple for unbuoyed fishing gear that's on the bottom. And that's, we've been, authorizing that for the last, 5 years, Dan, anyways.
Yeah.
For organizations like CCS to go out and grapple for abandoned fishing gear, and they have been fairly successful in doing that. Now this allows us to do that and this, instead of a blanket authorization, we're only going to do this on a case-by-case basis through special permit. So an organization could apply to us, we would evaluate based on the expertise, the likelihood of success, their ability to avoid gear and user group conflicts. And we would give weight to proposals, obviously, that will occur during the fixed gear fishing season. You don't want to do about grappling during the open season for obvious reasons. And so those would be the kind of the full things. Yep, good, Abby, thanks. And then just to wrap it up quick. The last thing we also need to do, in addition to these regulations, is just kind of develop these best management practices and basically, is. Although while it would not be mandatory for someone to return their fishing gear debris to the prior owner, we would encourage folks to do so in the case that the owner can be identified. We want to make sure that fishing gear debris should be disposed of lawfully. So in instances when fishing gear debris is salvageable, we're going to suggest that it's repurposed or sold or etc. And then one of the biggest issues we've heard loud and clear that everyone has an issue with is that how to dispose of derelict fishing gear. There's not really sufficient infrastructure in any of the ports to do that currently. And historically, there was fishing for energy dumpsters. And that had some moderate success in many of the ports, but that program has kind of been phased out. Only a few of the ports still have those dumpsters. And anytime you put a dumpster anywhere, you have to put it under supervision and lock and key, because otherwise it fills up with couches, and all kinds of stuff. So we need to, this is something we really need to focus on if we want to try to get funding for municipalities to have dumpsters at fishing ports to be able to help dispose of this. So with that.
Yeah, wait, Todd has a hand and then we'll come back.
These regulations apply to aquaculture here.
Does what?
Does it apply to aquaculture here?
It does not. And we met with the aquaculture industry specifically about this. So aquaculture is a little bit more complex because under Mass State statute, shellfish are managed under local control, so the municipalities have a role in regulating that as well as. So what we did is we reached out to several of the municipal shellfish officers and actually brought a group of growers in and collectively talked about it. And basically the feedback we got from the towns is that they have it fairly well under control. They know that most of the town's shellfish constables had fairly good protocols already in place to deal with it. The one thing that we would add is we're probably gonna add a statewide requirement that all aquaculture gear is tagged with the owner's name and information. That's not a ubiquitous requirement among all municipalities, and the ones that do are really successful in getting the gear back. And also identifying, hey, your gear's up on the beach, you need to clean it up. So that would be the one place we need to be.
We have a question online from Katie. So Katie, go ahead, I'll mute.
Sure, can you hear me? So it's not a question but a comment. So I'm on the board of CFRF down in Rhode Island, the Commercial Fisheries Research Foundation, and they just finished up a project for removing derelict gear in state waters, and now they're putting out a call for participants for removing ghost gear in offshore waters. So I don't know if you want to reach out to Dave Bethony down in CFRF and see what they're doing with, or what they did with the gear. I do know at the last last board meeting that they said they ended up having a partnership or forming a partnership with URI for some plastics. They're looking at reusing some of that plastics into either like clothing, shoes, you know how they do those lobster mats, leashes. But it might be something to look into to see if you guys can get any ideas from them.
Yeah, thanks, Katie. That's a great insight.
Yeah, there's also a company on recycling fishing gear for that. I know, Aaron Adams and someone from Ray Hillborn's group they were looking at ways to do that. The large scale, they came down to us and I said, one time I could follow on with that.
Thank you.
You get challenged to say, okay.
Derek.
So we've been talking as an organization, side scan sonar makes for expensive marine debris removal. You know, I think we've talked and we've got some mobile gear fishermen that are willing to put the power to it to get it up. Would you, you know, we'll submit a letter of authorization. I mean, we want to go out and get the gear balls that the fishermen know where they are. It's gonna take some horsepower to do it, not side scan sonar. So that's where we're looking, yeah. Yeah,
That would be included in that.
yeah.
I'll get you that one out.
Let me get a dumpster.
Okay, Eric.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. Got a question. You mentioned that there's no mandate to return derelict gear to its owner. What happens with mobile gear that hauls up, ropeless gear technology?
Yeah.
Put it on eBay.
That's expensive gear.
Dispose of it quickly.
That's a great question, Eric, and that's definitely one.
Call it
So in
back.
that case, that wouldn't be classified as, under our criteria,
Yeah.
likely would not be classified as fishing gear debris. Would be
They're
classified as.
It's crushed.
After it goes through a scallop dredge, it's the big.
Actually, that might subcontract.
Yeah, that's a great question, one I don't really have an answer to, and one that clearly we're gonna have to grapple with moving forward, and that, as that becomes more common.
Call the science.
How do you deal with it, who's responsible for what is, instead of hundreds of, $1,000 worth of gear, tens of thousands worth of dollars gears.
I just wanted to, highlight that, you're looking at old technology in regulations.
Fair enough,
New technology is on the go front.
yeah.
So, Bob, I wonder, are you looking for people like after this meeting to submit comments on some of these best practices?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is our proposal that we're developing. It's gonna go out to a public hearing, hopefully this summer, later this summer, but in the interim, if anyone would like to provide any comments or insight, I would be very happy to get the feedback.
Right, and that would be a Marine Fisheries Advisory Commission, public hearing and then final action on these rules. Right? So this would be under 17. This is where these two groups get really close. But all of you as organizational leaders can see this, and so it's good that you're informed about it. So when you see it, when we think of late, early fall, we might see this on the public hearing document.
I would think so, September maybe.
Okay, thanks so much, Bob. Really appreciate it.
Very good.
Okay, we're so close to Friday afternoon.
I feel like I'm in school again.
I know.
Bell just rang, it's time to go.
The last kind of main item before we go to our next steps in closing is public comment. So folks online, feel free to put up a hand if you want to share, like no more than 1 to 2 minutes. If there's anything you want this commission to know, same with people in the back of the room. If anyone has a comment. Yeah, I also think so, but.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
Wait, maybe we'll do like a last round robin of kind of closing thoughts. Okay, seeing no hands then. Why don't I tell me to do next steps and then we can do a quick round robin. Okay, so some of the things that I captured is one, we will send out the takeaways from the Resilient Coast virtual meeting. We will also share out the MDR response about the seafood seat on their commissioner working group. We will update the work plan and bring together the focus groups. Again, I think offshore wind has a little more immediate work right now than the ports group. So expect to hear from us on that soon. If you want to get in on that group, let us know. We can add you until we hit 4. Aubrey, you're going to share with us some of the main working waterfront commission information, and we'll try to pull that together for the September meeting. And then there's some follow-ups about the debris conversation, like Bob, you'll reach out to CFRF, and Kevin, you're gonna share. And then if anyone wants to share best practices, comments on the best practices of go for it. Okay, there is one thing, so I'm just gonna put this up. Oh, and then I need to share. Um. For. Commission members only, please. This is a scheduling poll. We will also send this out via email, but we're trying to get the September meeting on the books. So. Again, I will also send this email, but it's gonna have some date options. We have some venue options and feedback would be really helpful. We tried out this location. There are other options. They're all somewhat annoying to some people, so we want to see what works best. And then if you have any other feedback on the process, we were to it. Okay, so let's do a go around, maybe, Kevin, do we want to start here? So I think it's, if there's any last thing on your mind you want to share with the group, this is the great time.
Okay, thank you. Well, probably a little bit of the skunk in the room, because I know that people want to leave, but I'm a little concerned about the decision we made to delay in September, both the needs and innovations in seafood processing and the collaborative research alternative studies. So I'm not so sure, but the first point, the needs and innovation in seafood processing, is something I know that there's some recent news articles about labor problems with visas in the fishing plants and in New Bedford. I'm wondering if that's something that we should be considering as a group, how labor is going to be affected. And the collaborative research, so I'm a little more familiar with it, with the cuts for NOAA and the federal cuts for the NOAA and Science Federation or the Science Foundation and others. A lot of the surveys that the management regulations rely on are going to be cut back and limited. We're seeing that right now with this accident, the ABCAN. What's going to result from that? And so I do kind of think that we need to think about that as a group and think about how it could affect fisheries management. With the scallops, it might not be so bad, but with some of these other fisheries, you lose the federal group, you don't have any advice at all. It seems like that's a little more important. And then there's also the executive order that states that collaborative research really needs to be stepped up. So by putting this off till October, 5-6 months from now, seems like it's I just think it's probably something that we should think about. Or I was a bit I was in a brain pause when that came and said, well, let's push it off. I just wonder if we should discuss it.
Well, why don't we talk a little bit between meetings with folks who are in council, if you come in and think about on the second one, the what research or surveys, how we can frame it up for this group. On the labor, that's specifically tied to.
It's tied to things like visas.
Okay, that's what I did want to step into something unless it was supposed to be stepping into it.
Yeah.
Okay, so on that one, I don't know. I think, Eric, I don't know if we're in Bedford or like if there's conversation being had or what this commission can or can't do regarding action, so.
Yeah, not to sound like a coward, but I want no more. No, I mean, it's an interesting issue that's being talked about really in the shadows, much the way, some of the actual issues are in the shadows. And it's much more of a dialogue with the actual employers, I think. And what they're experiencing, what they're actually experiencing, as opposed to what people are sort of anticipating. So I'd have to think about, how this commission would engage on that.
I think I would think of it more as like economic development, like trying to train people in the workforce to make seafood competitive, like make sure that we're not losing workforce, to limit people having to go to different ports to offload because they're not. I would think of it that way. I wouldn't think of it in terms of getting into visas, but trying to think of how we can strengthen our workforce.
Yeah, and and that's a good point. There's the innovations part of it, AI and that. So there's also that.
Thanks, good. Sounds like we'll do a little talking, see what we can bring in September. Okay, all right.
Yeah, I'll make it quick. I just know some of us have been following the Loch Ness project, the locking ocean urban. I was recently approached by the team, inviting me to go out as an industry rep to witness it. I declined. I don't want to be the face of that project personally. But I wanted everyone to be aware that that is happening, and they're planning on departing August 12th. With the dispersal maybe being August 13th. Expecting the dispersal to take 4 to 12 hours to Wilkinson Basin. Again, it'll all depend on the weather, but I just want everyone to be aware because we're not having a meeting all together until September. So just to kind of stay tuned on that, but it's still happening.
I was wondering where that was. That's the,
Ocean
Carbon
upland.
sequestration.
Yeah, carbon sequestration where you're essentially dumping upland dye, hoping that.
Balancing the pH.
Yeah.
In the pool.
it
Yeah.
absorbs carbon and makes it sink, and it's a form of like decarbonization. It's, you know, there's a lot of ocean uses out there.
They're selling snake oil to people.
Yeah.
Put that to fisheries.
It's
so
an
I feel aware that
Hold on.
Why? It's just called sodium hydrochloride, but other than that, it's.
But it's natural.
As I said, you know, I wanted to, you know, it'd be one thing if I was on the research boat and I could collect the data and understand it, would speak to the fishing industry, but. We already provided comments from the Fishermen's Alliance about our concern about what's gonna happen below the surface, and larval fish, and I don't personally feel being on a boat that I would be able to attest to any of that impact, from just watching. All I could say is it happened on this date and I saw it die, so I took it, passed it up. I don't know if other groups will be approached, so that's why I'm just letting people know, but,
What's the volume? That's moved around.
I don't
You don't know?
the amount.
Yeah.
It was 60,000 gallons and then it was, or whatever the hell it was,
I don't remember.
6,000, you know.
Yeah, and it was gonna be in southern New England,
Right.
and then now they're just doing it in Wilkinson's, and they're gonna do one rather than
I
two.
think
Yeah,
it's 20% of what the original,
So they
Wasn't-
dialed it back.
yeah,
yeah, I mean, I think
it's way dialed back.
Okay.
Beth, were you saying you have a flyer?
I have a flyer, I'll send it to
If
you.
you send it
you
to
can
us,
send
then
it out.
we'll distribute it out. Okay, Gordon, any final thoughts?
You've heard plenty.
Okay.
I'm out.
Right, Ed?
I'm good.
I'm great, thanks.
I've made my voice heard, and I'll echo what Audrey just said, because I was approached as well.
Oh.
I did not want to be the face of the organization. I've spent my time at sea. I don't need another 24 to 48 hours at sea. The dispersal of life.
I just had this weird flashback. I teach tanker operations at Maritime. And this is how old I am. One of the things we teach a lot about is the Exxon Valdez accident, how it made the tanker industry a lot safer. And it has statistically. But when they had the spill, the very first press conference that they had, the representative from Exxon stood up and said, "It's gonna be okay. We have this stuff called dispersant that makes it disappear." And there was a bunch of fishermen, there was a biologist, and the biologist said, "Excuse me, disappear? Where does it go?"
That much gone?
It goes to far.
Okay,
This was-
chairs, any last
No,
closing words for us?
for me, great meeting, and thank you for indulging us to keep you here all day.
I like the strategy of doing both, is, it maximizes all of our time on one, rather than trying to divide.
Oh, boy, all right,
We're multitasking enough, you know, like,
yeah,
at least we're just focused here today, yeah.
Because 2 half days do take 2
A
days.
full 2 full days,
Yeah, right.
correct, that's what I was just thinking, well said.
Allison, any closing?
I'll just echo Dan's thank you and have a lovely weekend.
Okay, thanks, everybody.
Thank you all. You're free.
Yeah.
I can't roll.